some people sort of identify as a starseed or something like that just because of how different they feel, from let's be honest, the vast majority of the world around us. I think that there's something positive in that, in the sense that
there can be
possibly they are someone who has a much more spiritual outlook than those around them.
They could be. Doesn't mean they're from another world, though.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely right.
I think that's the point I wanted to get to, which is like, just because you possibly are much more spiritually advanced than the people around you, or certainly feel very different about the world around you. You're not as conditioned by materialism and all that, and you are searching for truth and devoting your life to spirituality in some way. Yeah, it doesn't mean that the explanation is that you're from another planet.
No, of course not.
Yeah,
of course not. All that is very understandable, but they'd be much, much more than that. They'd be an absolute clear-cut mission, and they'd know what their mission is, and they may or may not, in some cases, have known all the time that they came from another planet, but that knowledge would dawn on them in the right way, and it would come through in an enlightened way. It wouldn't just be, I think I must be from another planet, I feel different.
The Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence, where politics is not the answer, materialism counts for nothing, and spirituality will set you free.
Right, we are back with the Spiritual Freedom Show. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Darren.
So today we have an interesting show, I think. This one related a bit more to extraterrestrials.
Right.
And so this person wrote in, they said, I believe in extraterrestrials and past lives on other worlds. So why does the notion of starseeds seem phony? And just for anyone who doesn't know, they describe starseeds as souls from other planets who are here to help humanity. Kind of this idea.
Okay.
We can get into whether we that's something that we endorse or not. But they go on to say, as it goes with anything such as psychics, people with supernatural powers, extraterrestrials, etc., the principle may be true, but I feel it's far rarer than it is. There's a lot of people claiming that, that they may be something when they're not.
Yeah,
once a concept goes mainstream, people start to identify with these labels, but like 99% of the claims are false or bear no evidence. And I think that's an interesting point.
Yes, so starseed, just so I've got this right, is somebody themselves who thinks they come from another planet. Is that right?
That's right.
I think it's very rare. Yeah, extremely rare. I met one. I could actually have a tabloid front page say my best friend was an alien. But Dr. King really was from another world. But then look at him. Look what he did. Just look at his life.
How extraordinary he was.
How extraordinary it was. Yeah. I mean, just even before he was contacted, just people of this earth don't behave like that. They don't spend their 20s practicing yoga and while doing a job. And the media certainly at one time used to latch on, and they possibly still would, to like former taxi driver was contacted. It's not the former taxi driver, it's the yogi that was contacted. Yes, he drove taxis. Jesus was a carpenter. As Dr. King used to say, taxi driver meets carpenter on hill in Devon, because he had a contact with Master Jesus there. Sri Krishna was a cowherd. That's not what he was. That's what they had to do when they were on Earth to pay bills, which again is a practical thing. What he distinguishes an extraterrestrial will be their life. An outstanding individual. Swami Sivananda would be another one. Another one would be, from recent times, Gandhi. But they're not, very common. I mean, you can't rule out a person walking around who is one, has a secret mission of some kind, but it's extremely rare. I'd agree with that question. It's very rare. Yeah.
Maybe we can talk a little bit some more of the, what would be the yardstick of someone who really is from another planet. I mean, because at a minimum, if you imagine they are millions of years more advanced than us spiritually and technologically, even just a fraction of their consciousness being here is going to be someone who is just amazing.
Amazing. And if you think about it, someone like, let's just take Dr. King, because I knew him so very well, and I was in touch with him every day for 20 years, so I had real insights into how he operated. You could see, if you got really close to him, you could tell, because he didn't react in the way that people on this earth react, to things. He was brilliant at, assuming a persona, and he did adopt a lot of, he liked to conform wherever he could. If it was worth conforming to, he would. So he's actually, with a small c, quite a conservative person, man, if you like. But his actual characteristics was he was serving all the time. He was conscious of the world all the time. Most people aren't. Most people, I'm not saying they don't do good things because they do. If there's a neighbour in distress, it's amazing what neighbours around the world will do, and it's fantastic and it's essential. But his focus, he would do that too, but his focus was on the world, and that too marked him. And on his mission, he never stopped. He never stopped being what he was, and never, like a mask never fell to reveal something else.
Yeah.
He never doubted it. He knew. I would reach out a hand at this point, since it's come up, to people who believe they're from another planet, that, and they won't like me for saying this, but there could be a mental health issue there. And in fact, if you believe you're from another planet and you're not, there is a mental health issue there. And I would just I'm not going to give mental health advice here and now. I'm not qualified to do that, but I would look into it. I would try and seek help. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I think just from what I read and this experience, I would say that some people sort of identify as a starseed or something like that just because of how different they feel.
Yeah.
From let's be honest, the vast majority of the world around us.
Yeah.
I think that there's something positive in that, in the sense that
there can be.
Possibly they are someone who has a much more spiritual outlook than those around.
They could be. Doesn't mean they're from another world, though.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely right.
I think that's the point I wanted to get to, which is like, just because you possibly are much more spiritually advanced than the people around you, or certainly feel very different about the world around you. You're not as conditioned by materialism and all that, and you are searching for truth and devoting your life to spirituality in some way. Yeah, it doesn't mean that the explanation is that you're from another planet.
No, of course not.
Yeah,
of course not. I mean, and also there's a question of advancement. Somebody who comes from another planet has entered states of, actually samadhic states, the yogis would call them, but they're cosmic or galactic even samadhic states. And these are outlined in the 9 freedoms, in the higher freedoms. And we can see in the 7th freedom, for example, such a person would start to know the why of existence. We've talked about that before on the Spiritual Freedom Show. So they come with that inherent knowledge. It may not be accessible to them initially, but what we would call the highest states, nirvana, cosmic consciousness, heaven, whatever words we want to use, they've already gone beyond that.
Yeah.
So you can see this quite clearly in Dr. King. You can see it very clearly in the Master Jesus and in the Lord Buddha, just to name 3. They throw a bridge, as it were, over the river of life on this earth quite quickly and get to their real state. But they have to still make the effort to do so, because they've been born through the womb of an earth woman. They've chosen that. And so they still have to go through the motions, as it were, and those motions can be very demanding, but they do it fairly quickly. It takes them, in Dr. King's case, it took him 10 years to gain that, and that was living in a city in the West, to gain that state of full enlightenment. And that state of full enlightenment is actually below what he already knew. I think you can see it actually in this book, in the 9 Freedoms, in his commentary on cosmic consciousness. There's a certain detachment about the way he writes about that.
I see.
If you compare it, for example, to the wonderful state described by Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, wonderful man, in his autobiography of a yogi, I don't think it's the same state, but however, it's a beautiful state. But there's a certain emotional, if Yogananda will forgive me, don't want to use the word attachment, but there's a certain emotion there in the way he describes it. And understandably, wouldn't any of us feel that way? But with Dr. King, if you read this, he even writes it in the 3rd person. Yeah. Doesn't say I did this and I did that. It's he, I think is the word used. Yeah. And he leaves it because he's not satisfied by it. And the reason he's not satisfied by it is because he's aware of the suffering of the Mother Earth. Now, that's not a terrestrial reaction. You look at any of the great yogas, and we have some, not many, but we have some from this earth. Swami Vivekananda is another one from who's actually ascended now, but is from this earth. And there are others through history. They've entered these states. They've gone on to give great service. But they haven't had that sort of dissatisfaction, is the word, although Dr. King doesn't use that word, with himself, not with the state. And that's one thing that marked him out. He was, no matter what he did, he was never fully satisfied with what he could do. He was always going on to the next thing. And that, again, is a very non-terrestrial kind of reaction to life. People bask in their honours and so on, generally, on this earth. Sometimes duly earned, but still they bask in them.
Yeah.
You know, and they seek out laurels, and then they sit on them. But Dr. King would never sit on any laurels that came his way, and then not nearly enough did come his way.
Yeah, it's interesting that you pick up on that, and you know, we're kind of gathering some of the characteristics here of someone who really is from another planet.
Yeah.
I mean, you talked about him being basically devoted to service completely, and devoted to service on a global scale. So you know, someone who has this global outlook in that way, and that is, you know, dedicated to the mission basically 24 hours a day, a mission of that scale as well, and someone who, you know, is not satisfied, as you say, with those attainments, but rather focus entirely on the mission and what's required to achieve.
And here's
that.
another quality he had, which was a beautiful quality, and you can hear it in his commentaries, his lectures on the 9 freedoms, and you can particularly hear it in all his early lectures, many of which are available on audio. His absolute belief and faith in the potential of humanity. And I know that because with the title of the book, the last book he wrote, which I was honoured to co-author with him, he chose the title, Realise Your Inner Potential. And he lived that. He believed that. He believed people. You can hear it.
Yeah.
He believed other people could do what he did. He believed other people could go to satellite number 3, could, you know, receive transmissions. I think over the years, and certainly by the time I got to know him, and especially when he was older, he realized that most people weren't going to do that. Even the best people weren't going to go that far. But he's never completely lost that faith and belief in what people could do, what people could understand. As a teacher, he was extremely advanced. And that's why I welcome the chance to have shows like this one to sort of make it as accessible as it can possibly be made. And I think the reason was that he believed people were capable of that advancement. And he thought they could get it. And hopefully, one day, enough people will.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting point as well. You bring up about Vivekananda, because there's someone who was from Earth, not from another planet.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, he's a spiritual giant among us.
A giant.
Yeah. And so it's like, you know, I think it goes back to the point that even as someone who's very spiritually advanced, and even someone who's making even an impact on a massive scale as he was, you know, lecturing and introducing Vedanta to the West. It's not, you know, he didn't have to hang on to this idea of being from another planet, you know, to justify how he was able to do that.
Not at all. He was an Earth person who'd made it, which is very inspiring.
Exactly.
And he had this attitude, which is, you know, it's not enough just to believe in God. It's not enough just to have faith in God even. You've got to see God.
Yeah.
I would actually put it this way, you've got to know God. And he did. And he went out to do it, and he did it. And he knew he was going to pass on before the age of 40, and he did, and actually he ascended, and he's now an ascended master. And there aren't many, I think would be shocked. And by the way, ascended masters aren't all men at all. It's not it's not a gender thing. It's the male and female ascended masters, but he was one of them, and a recent one.
And I think that's almost a more inspiring thing, isn't it? Because we're talking about people from Earth. Versus the outstanding examples of, you know, Sivananda and Krishna and Dr. George King, who came from other planets to help teach and inspire us.
I agree.
Yeah, but it's like you can't, you know, here's the proof that someone from Earth is doing this.
I think what Dr. King would say to that, though, just as a counterbalance, because I have given a lecture before now, and I've had people disappointed by that very fact.
Oh, really?
These great ones, Jesus, they came from another planet.
That's why they were so.
Does that mean I can't do it? No, it doesn't. Dr. King would say no. He was in an Earth human body with all the things that go with that, and he came to demonstrate what we can do, as did Jesus. You know, he didn't come to be, he was the great healer, but he also came to show us that we can heal. Yeah. That got lost somewhere in many quarters. And Buddha came to show us that we can gain enlightenment, because he did it as an Earth
Yes.
almost as an Earth person,
Yes,
if you
yes,
like.
yes.
So, but I agree with your point. Where you get an outstanding terrestrial person who really makes it, it is very inspiring, and the more the merrier, because I think it's rare, sadly, to go that far. There are great examples of service, Schweitzer. One could list them off. By human beings, fantastic, dedicated work. But to achieve that high level is rare, and in the past, very often, it's been associated with nomadic, sadhu-like detachment from the world. To do it in the world, and you could argue that Vivekananda did it in the world, because although he lived the yogi life, he lived it among people and in the West to certain parts of his life. That's really, I agree with you, very inspiring.
Yeah.
I actually came across somebody quite recently. I think I've got his name right, Swami Narayananda.
Oh yeah.
He didn't do it like Vivekananda did it. But I do believe he attained samadhi. And he did it in the old way, in the Himalayas and so on, and in the retreat. But after he'd done it, though, he spent his time teaching, writing, and travelled to the West quite often. I think especially Denmark, I believe. But he's not very, very well known. But he's one of the. It's always a jewel when you find someone that you actually believe really genuinely attain that state.
Yeah. I think those are great inspiration because I'll admit, to be honest, like many years ago, when I heard about this concept of starseed, I was like, I wonder if I am. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's okay.
And I think so. I completely emphasize where people come from.
I empathise.
But then when you start to learn more about people who really are, and then you start to see the inspiration of people who are actually from Earth too, and what they've been able to achieve. It's like, well, no, actually, I'm very much from here, but I have the inspiration of those terrestrials and the example of those who came from other planets to show us the way as one of us as well, as you just described.
And that's what they want. I mean, I had a walk with Dr. King one evening, and I was very disheartened. I thought I was about 25 then. And I seemed to be making a lot of mistakes around him. I'd just been brought out full time, and I thought I was letting him down. I wasn't happy with my work, and he said, "Look, come on, we're going for a walk." And he could be strict. There's no argument about that. And he was very direct. You knew exactly where you stood with him. You didn't have to guess. There was no talking behind anybody's back. You knew he was honest. He was straight, especially with his close followers. So we had this walk. As I'd say, I was quite disheartened and disappointed in myself at that point, and he turned round to me on this walk and said, "There is nothing that I've done that you couldn't do."
Wow.
And when he said those words, in my mind, I was almost thinking, pull the other one. It's terribly disrespectful, but I was thinking, very nice of you to say so, Master, but no, I couldn't do what you did. This is what I was thinking. And that thought is still a bit there, I have to be honest. But he pointed at me. It was only two of us, and Ray Nielsen was on the same walk, another of his disciples, older than myself. But when I was thinking that, he said, "And I really believe that." And he really believed that. And that's the essence of his whole being. He believed we could. Attain great things, whether, that was said to me personally. I can't take it as a blanket thing, but I know he believed in the potential of all people to really go to God and really make it.
Yeah, I have to admit, it's a very uplifting feeling, actually, just talking about it and hearing you share that story and that experience. I think there's one last thing I wanted to touch on here, which is, I think the point that just because there are people making this claim, either consciously or otherwise, imagining it or, putting it on, it doesn't mean that there is no one who isn't really from another planet here on Earth. Or that,
of course, there are people, and there always have been people from other planets. They have to work usually. I mean, their biggest problem is our karma, which is a massive topic, but they can't intervene beyond a certain point. So they come here with prescribed missions. So if you take the Master Jesus, he came here primarily not to teach. He's one of the greatest teachers who's ever walked the earth. I mean, and his quick responses in moments of crisis. Not that the Gospels are very reliable documents. I think they're quite lacking. Having being a co-author of the biography of Dr. King, you can see that the Gospels and some of the other accounts of great beings don't really reveal much about the person, the man, the individual, if you like. But however, they tell us some of the things he said and did and where he went. And, his quick response of, let he who was without sin cast the first stone, when put in that really difficult political position. If he'd said the wrong thing, he could have been seized that moment. Shows he was a brilliant man. Carpenter. Some might say. The Daily Mail. Carpenter speaks to, gives sermon on a mount.
Exactly.
But he was, and not just the Daily Mail, to be fair, but he was an outstanding person. They come with their specific missions. How they do, so Jesus didn't come to be a teacher. He came to save the world from a crisis, to take karma, or to do it in whatever way he chose. He chose his way of doing it. And not every... Dr. King didn't like his way of doing it because he didn't want Jesus to suffer that much. He chose to die. He clearly manipulated his death. It's obvious. No one can just walk into, Jerusalem and do what he did. And things are definitely going to happen. It was a setup, and Judas was probably instrumental key in that plan by Jesus. Let's just correct that probable mistake there in people's minds. But, he had his way of doing it. Dr. King was given certain things he had to do, but he went way beyond them, invented his own missions, and changed the way missions were done. And so you could see that I'm sure the same is true of Moses, I'm sure the same is true of Buddha, and undoubtedly Sri Krishna and others. They come, though, with particular tasks. They can't stray, though, this is the point I want to make, beyond their karmic commission.
I see.
Really. Not without permission to stray beyond your commission. Because that would then be interfering in the karma of humanity. So they're greatly limited by our karma, and they would know that. They would have an absolute clear-cut mission. They wouldn't come to be a person who feels a bit unlike everyone else on earth, a bit different, a bit interested in spiritual things, a bit, gets mocked for their beliefs. They'd be, all that is very understandable, but they'd be much, much more than that. They'd be an absolute clear-cut mission, and they'd know what their mission is. And they may or may not, in some cases, have known all the time that they came from another planet. But that knowledge would dawn on them in the right way, and it would come through in an enlightened way. It wouldn't just be, I think I must be from another planet. I feel different.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Darren here. Thanks for tuning into the show. Now, if you enjoyed that episode, don't forget to subscribe for more wisdom from the 9 Freedoms. If you'd like to find out more about the 9 Freedoms, about Mars Sector 6 by Dr. George King, go to our website, that's aetherius.org. Richard and I love hearing from you, receiving your comments, your questions on your spiritual experiences, and talking about them on the show. So do write to us, share them with us at spiritualfreedom@richardlawrence.co.uk. Always remember that service is the jewel in the rock of attainment. See you next time.